things, who, of course, was a candidate for president on the Republican ticket just a few years ago. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Majority Leader whether he expects we'll take an up or down vote on a clean debt limit extension when we return in September. And I yield to my friend.
I would say to the gentleman the answer to that last question is no. But I would say to the gentleman the discussion the gentleman just had was so full of different various and sundry issues, I don't even know really where to begin, other than to say what I think is lost in the gentleman's comments is the focus on the hardworking families and businesses of middle-class America. And it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that the gentleman is full of that's not going to happen because Washington says that's not going to happen for political reasons. And what we ought to be focused on is how we can act to solve the anxiety that seems to continue to grow on the part of the American public when they wonder about their job, they worry about their tuition costs, they worry about their children's education, they worry every night when they go to bed. And the gentleman is so sure that we can and can't do things for political reasons. The President is out giving campaign speeches, some of which we have heard dozens of times during the campaign season, that what all of us should be absolutely focused on is coming together not for political imperative, but to solve the problems, to provide the relief to the middle class of this country that is asking us to do that. So instead of the political demands and imperatives that the gentleman's list of issues was about, let's focus on the people that sent us here. Let's make sure that this body of any in Washington can begin to work for the people rather than the other way around. Now yield back.
I've heard that answer, I think, more than the President's given in the speeches that Mr. Connolly refers to. This party has always been, is now, and will be focused on the working people to which the Majority Leader refers. The President asked us to pass a jobs bill. No jobs bill has been brought to this floor. I know that there's some bills that the Republican Party leader wants to say, Mr. Speaker, are jobs bills. But there's been no comprehensive jobs bill. There's none scheduled for next week. But what the American people are really concerned about is their board of directors is not working. This isn't about Washington. This is about people who voted all over America. And the leader and his party made their point, and we had an election, not here in Washington, all over America. And America voted. And it hasn't made any difference on this floor. Politics as usual. Confrontation as usual. Refusal to compromise as usual. Talk about regular order but not going to conference. Not going to conference on a budget, not going to conference on a farm bill, not going to conference on a Violence Against Women Act. We finally passed that. So when the Majority Leader repairs to the fact that we want to focus on working people, he's absolutely right. We do want to focus on that. And the working people of America voted. They didn't all vote for my side. Because I told the Majority Leader last week, 1,400,000 of them more than voted for our side than voted for his side. But his side's in charge. We understand that. And we know we need to compromise. We know we need to work together. But we haven't been doing so. And he can talk as much as he wants. That's what the American people believe as well. I tell my friend the Majority Leader. I asked him about the debt limit. He said no. One of his predecessors...
Mr. Speaker, will the gentleman yield?
I want to clarify what he said no on was that a clean debt limit extension was not coming to the floor.
In September, yes, Mr. Speaker.
I appreciate the Majority Leader's comment. Can he tell me whether there might be a possibility of having a clean debt limit extension after September? Because I tell the gentleman again, I want to repeat, so that he knows, his party knows, and America knows, we're prepared to work with the majority party to do in a bipartisan way what every leader believes is the responsible action to take. One of his predecessors, Senator Roy Blunt, said in responding to whether we ought to risk default by not passing a debt limit, he said this: "No, I don't support that. I think holding the debt limit hostage, in other words, if you don't do the debt limit, we're not going to do this, that, or the other. Or, said another way, if you don't repeal Obamacare, we're going to let the country default." Senator Blunt, again, one of his predecessors, "I don't support that. I think holding the debt limit hostage to any specific thing is probably not the best negotiating place." Now, I thank my friend for his comment, Mr. Speaker, and I would again ask him, could we expect a clean debt limit extension at some point in time between September 30th and November 15th? And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I'd say to the gentleman that it is our hope that we can work together across the aisle to solve the problems, to come up with the answers as to how we are going to pay back the additional debt that we'll have to incur in this country. And I think whatever budget you look at, their side or our side, Mr. Speaker, in any iteration calls for the incurrence of additional debt. The object should be for us to reduce the need for us to incur that debt so we can relieve the American people of that contingent liability, and our side has said we would like to do so within the next 10 years to bring the budget to balance. And I hope that the gentleman will join us in that spirit rather than saying we should just continue to borrow into eternity without some recognition that that just can't be a sustainable solution either. So I would say to the gentleman, when he is off talking about the need to go to conference, and frankly some of the statements he made about VAWA and Farm Bill were inaccurate, but I do think that there are a lot of things that this House has done that the President nor the Senate seems willing to respond. And as I said before, Mr. Speaker, what we're trying to do is to address the needs of the working people, the middle class of this country. We passed the Skills Act. That was a bill designed to try and align the worker training programs at the federal level with the employment opportunities out there across the different regions of the country, so we could respond to the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of job openings in certain industries simply because our workforce doesn't have the proper skills and training. The President, if he wanted to help the middle-class families, instead of off campaigning again, giving the speeches, he could come and call up Harry Reid in the Senate and say, bring that bill to the floor, Mr. Leader. We can do something for the American people. In the same vein, this House last week passed a bill which I believe, and I'm sure the gentleman shares my sentiment, that ultimately what we've got to do to grow our economy and secure our economic future is to provide for a quality education for our kids. We passed a landmark piece of legislation last week without any bipartisan support, Mr. Speaker. But again, if the gentleman is so intent on wanting to help and wanting to do something, not because of Washington's needs, but because of what we've got to do for the kids across this country and their families, then let's help try and forge an answer on reauthorizing the education bill. We also, Mr. Speaker, passed a bill that made it easier for working families to spend time with their kids and hold down a wage job, an hourly wage job. Is there any movement on that? The President could certainly say, let's do that. Let's provide some relief to the middle class. We also passed in the House, Mr. Speaker, several energy bills to help the families out there across this country who are on their vacations right now, choking when they see the price of gas at the pump. We have bills. The President could go ahead and approve the Keystone Pipeline. Where else in the world could you have an environmentally sensitive people other than in America? We do it cleaner and better than anyone. And to sit here and deny us the opportunity to take advantage of our indigenous resources, all it does is cost our working families and businesses more money. We also have passed bills to allow for the safe and environmentally sensitive ways of going into our deep oceans, to go in and to tap into the resources that are there, things that technology had unleashed. But yet, the Senate nor the President seems interested in helping the middle class and the working families, because all we hear from the other side is what we can and can't do politically here in Washington. I would say to the gentleman, there are plenty of things that we could get done together. Let's start to focus on the people of this country, not the political imperatives of this institution. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for that response, which I took as a no, which didn't indicate that we could expect to see bipartisan work on making sure that the government pays its bills that have already been incurred. No, there was a lot of rhetoric, and there was a lot of recitation, Mr. Speaker, about bills. All those bills have something in common. Do it my way or no way. And we had an election. I tell the gentleman again, he knows that. They thought they were going to take the Senate. They didn't. Majority of in the Senate is Democrats. And the President of the United States was reelected. And the House Republican majority was returned. But that didn't mean the American people didn't expect us to work together. And I tell the gentleman, I'm not sure what error he thought I made. We did not go to conference on the Violence Against Women Act.
Mr. Speaker,
we did not go to conference yet on the Farm Bill.
The gentleman would yield.
I'd be glad to yield to my friend.
There was no vehicle to go to conference on, Mr. Speaker. If the gentleman recalls, there was a blue slip on the Senate bill, Mr. Speaker, and so we took up the bill in the House and went ahead and passed the bill. So I don't even know why that is even pertinent to this discussion, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also say the gentleman understands as well. There was a bipartisan farm bill that came to the floor, and if I recall, that bipartisanship faded away, which is what now then caused the House to bring up another farm bill, and this time, trying to be transparent in the process, brought up the agricultural policy piece, which has passed the House without any bipartisan support, Mr. Speaker. And then we are also, as the gentleman knows, engaged with discussions with the chairman of the Agricultural Committee as to forging a consensus on a nutrition piece so that we can, yes, act again on that. So I'd say, Mr. Speaker, to the gentleman, it is not accurate that we don't intend to eventually go to conference and iron out the differences between the House and the Senate on both of those issues, on the ag policy as well as the nutrition policies. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I didn't talk about intentions. I talked about fact. Talked about fact. Pete Sessions, chairman of the Rules Committee, Republican, said this: when we pass the Farm Bill, I believe that this is an honest attempt to get us to go, by passing part of the Farm Bill, to go to conference. I asked the gentleman last week. I asked him again. There's nothing on here about going to conference. The gentleman's told me we're not going to conference until we pass something on the nutrition part. We want to see something on the nutrition part passed. Pete Sessions said, in addition to that, when talking about why they brought the Farm Bill to the floor in the condition it was, dropping all reference and provisions for poor people to have nutritional assistance, said this: we're attempting to then separate, bifurcate, offer today a rule and the underlying legislation, which hopefully will pass, which would go to conference. And the Senate, because they passed their own Farm Bill, has included in its provisions where they discuss the nutrition program. As a result of that, this is Pete Sessions, Republican chairman of the Rules Committee speaking, Mr. Speaker. As a result of that, that should be in their bill in a conference measure. The House simply, at this point, if we pass this part, could go to conference. So the gentleman is not accurate when he reflects there's nothing to go to conference on. The Senate has amended their bill into the House bill. We could clearly go to conference on that under the processes. I think the gentleman must know that, and that was the expectation that Pete Sessions says was the purpose of passing the Farm Bill. But let me go back to the point I was making before the gentleman wanted to correct me on what I think were accurate representations, both on all the pieces of legislation I mentioned. Certainly that's the case on the budget. My opinion, it's the case certainly on the budget. I don't know what the intentions are, but the fact is we haven't gone to conference on the Farm Bill. And we didn't go to conference on the Violence Against Women bill. Fact is, what those bills that he mentioned did have in common, Mr. Speaker, is, and he said, we got no Democratic votes for it. There was no work to get Democratic votes. There was no work for compromise. That's, I tell my friend, why the polls reflect of working people such concern. The majority, Mr. Speaker, talked a lot about confidence. Talked about a lot about building confidence if we were going to grow the economy. I agree with him. We need to have individuals confident, and the gentleman knows, because he talks to a lot of business leaders, as I do. Every one of them says that if they had confidence that we could work together and get things done, not put the debt limit at risk, not put the ongoing operations of government at risk, not continue to have fights. I talked to a major leader of one of the health insurers in this country and said, look, we may not like some of this bill, but we think it's the law and we're going to work to try to make it work for all Americans. We're not doing that, Mr. Speaker. We're trying to repeal. We're not conferencing. We're not cooperating. We're not trying to come to compromise. And we can talk about working people as is appropriate for us to do. And that's what the President is out doing, not here in Washington, not talking to all of us. He's going talking to the people and saying, look, this is my program. This is what I want to do. And I'm not getting cooperation from the Congress of the United States. I think he's absolutely right. And he's talking to the people, not to us, not here in Washington, but he's criticized for doing that by the majority leader. Mr. Speaker, I think that's what he ought to be doing, because the American people are ultimately going to have to make a decision as to who is looking out for their interest and who is just simply confronting and not listening to the people in the last election just a few months ago or right now, when the people are saying, board of directors, work together. Stop obstructing. I would hope we could do that, Mr. Speaker. Unless the majority leader has something further he wants to say, I'm going to yield back the balance of my time. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. And for what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and further, when the House adjourns on that day, it adjourn to meet on Tuesday, July 30th, 2013, when it shall convene at noon for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. This is the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this is the 31st anniversary of the creation of the National Council for Independent Living. NCIL is the leading organization for people with disabilities. 32 years ago, I began my career and life passion serving individuals who were living with life-changing disability. I'm proud to be one of the 214 co-sponsors of the Achieving of a Better Life Experience Act. The ABLE Act will ease the financial strains for individuals with disabilities. I'm also proud to be the author of the Special Needs Trust Fairness Act of 2013. This legislation removes the current barriers that prevents individuals with disabilities from independently creating a special needs trust. What we're talking about is individual independence and making sure that public policy is a tool, not a barrier, in achieving this goal. Once again, I want to thank the National Council for Independent Living for their leadership and service. Working with advocates such as the National Council for Independent Living, we will accomplish independence, dignity, and success for individuals living with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I want to take this time to thank Congresswoman Eleanor Norton Holmes yesterday for pulling together the first meeting of the caucus on black men and boys. As we know by the Trayvon Martin verdict, and his dad also participated in this yesterday, that we need to do something about the violence that is happening and that occurs all too often, particularly with many young African American boys in our communities. Black boys in our communities face daily obstacles, including run-ins with the police, high rates of unemployment, racial profiling, and extreme prosecution that leads to over-incarceration in the community. As a black man, I can attest to what President Obama said in his recent speech, that Trayvon Martin could have been me. African-American men have lived an experience of being stereotyped and profiled in other ways that most people have never had to endure and really can never understand. Mr. Speaker, it is our job as legislators to develop policies that create a level playing field so everyone can succeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the House passed important legislation, the Defense Appropriations Bill. This bill prohibits furloughs on employees serving our Department of Defense in fiscal year 2014. These employees are now on their third week of furloughs. This week we heard from Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller Bob Hale about the adverse impacts which are expected to worsen if furloughs continue. His message made clear the harm furloughs have already had on our force readiness. He echoed what I am hearing from my constituents that I talk to on a daily basis. These dedicated patriots employed by DOD are disappointed and frustrated they cannot support the warfighter and are fearful of an unknown future. While it may be too late for the 11 days of furlough through September, Congress has the opportunity, and I believe the obligation, to get this important provision prohibiting furloughs signed into law as soon as possible. And I urge the Senate to join the House in passing this important measure. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, the 29th, will be the 5th anniversary of the passage in this House of the first and only apology for slavery and Jim Crow laws in this nation's history. This nation had 246 years of slavery and over 100 years of Jim Crow. The resolution, which passed with only 2 Republican sponsors, Wayne Gilchrist and Phil English, said that we needed to rectify the lingering consequences of slavery and Jim Crow, and indeed we still need to. There are many areas that have been shown in the criminal justice system with racial profiling, more likelihood of being arrested 4 times as much if you're African American than white for marijuana, and sentencing given if you're African American. The needs for public health and public education and for jobs more significant, and a much less net worth of African Americans, all vestiges of Jim Crow and slavery. As we look toward the 5th anniversary of that resolution and the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, both sides of this aisle need to look toward the least of these, people who have been discriminated against and enslaved by our nation's laws, and rectify those lingering consequences. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak today. It is an honor and a privilege to take some time to recognize one of my constituents. Last month, Oakland County Circuit Judge Michael Warren was honored with the Americanism Award from the Daughters of the American Revolution of Michigan. The award states that it was presented to Judge Warren in recognition of outstanding accomplishments and contributions for his tireless work in promoting patriotism for the American people, especially through Patriot Week. Our country is an exceptional nation because of what happened in 1776. We need more people teaching the history of our founding and promoting patriotism. Judge Warren is doing a great job in Michigan, and he's a great example that should be followed nationwide. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my time.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek to be recognized?
For 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the lady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in honor of July 20th, which is a special day of remembrance for the families and loved ones of all those who have suffered so greatly as a result of one of the biggest national tragedies in modern Greek history, the 1974 illegal invasion and occupation of the island of Cyprus by Turkish soldiers. It happened 39 years ago this week. The invasion forced nearly thousands of Greek Cypriots to leave their homes in the occupied area and become refugees in their own country. Their religious and cultural sites were damaged and destroyed, their religious freedoms restricted, and their rights disrespected. In violation of international law, the Turkish soldiers remain there still, occupying more than 1/3 of the island. They ignore all the UN resolutions pertaining to Cyprus, and there have been many passed. As the co-chair and co-founder of the Congressional Hellenic Caucus, I have worked diligently with my colleagues in the caucus and out of mutual concern for the continued division and occupation of Cyprus. And we continue to work with the caucus to raise awareness of the Cyprus problem and the role the U.S. can play to support the negotiations. The people of Cyprus deserve a unified and democratic country, and we are working towards that end. I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's an honor to stand here and talk about the 20,000 babies that are born each year in the United States with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. This is one of those children, Gabe Griffin of Birmingham. As he grows into adulthood, his muscle development will be arrested if we don't make progress. His parents, Scott and Tracy Griffin of Birmingham, and Joel and Dana Woods, and other parents, not of him, but of another young man, are working hard here for progress for research. The FDA is now considering whether to grant accelerated approval to a potentially breakthrough therapy. It's a drug called edapersine. While properly taken into account, it is important for the FDA to make a timely decision on this drug. When you look at this picture, you know that Gabe and other children don't have a long time. Let's not rob them of a healthy childhood and a healthy lifestyle. Let's do everything we can to urge the FDA to research this drug and make it available to the general public. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, President Obama yesterday pivoted at jobs, or it has been reported, during another campaign-style speech at Knox College in Illinois. During his hour-long speech, we heard no new ideas. Instead, President Obama battened down the hatches on his economic policies. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York recently reported that more than 50% of recent college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. Unfortunately, President Obama's economic policies have failed the class of 13. Since he took office, President Obama has never really pivoted to jobs. Instead, he's always pivoted to big government. What's really grown over the last 4 years is President Obama's Washington. It's a big government boomtown. In contrast, the House has passed several pieces of legislation that would enable job growth. Let me name just a few: the Skills Act, the Keystone Pipeline, and expanded offshore domestic energy production. If the President and the Senate would like to get serious about job creation, let me suggest they go to www.gop.gov/jobs. Unless the President truly pivots away from big government, we won't see real economic recovery until the class of 2017 graduates. I thank the Speaker and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader. gentleman is recognized for 60 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor and privilege to be here and to speak. And at this time, I do want to yield such time as he may consume to my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Whitfield.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman very much. And yesterday, the President made a speech at Knox College in Illinois. And in that speech, he categorized Republican members of Congress in 3 groups. He said there was a group of Republicans who agreed with him on his policy, but were afraid to vote for him, did not have the courage to vote with him. He also said that another category of Republicans are those who, because it was his idea, are opposed to it. And then the third group of Republicans, he said, were those who have a view of the world that inequality and injustice is inevitable. And I was a little bit offended by that categorization, and I wanted to take a few moments today to explain to the American people specifically why many in our conference opposed the President on some of his economic policies particularly, and on his energy policies particularly. I want to preface my remarks by saying when the President was elected, the first thing that he focused on was transforming America's electricity policy. And his #1 goal was to produce more green energy through solar panels and wind energy. And he spent billions of dollars on that through the stimulus package, much of the money going to venture capital friends of his, wealthy supporters of his, like Mr. Kaiser of Oklahoma on the Solyndra project. And in addition to that, the 1603 Treasury program that give grants to certain green energy projects, the 1703 and 1705 programs at the Department of Energy. Now, that was the focus of the President. And that was the part of his stimulus package that was going to get the economy back on track. Well, I would like to remind people that in June, just this past June, we lost in America 240,000 full-time jobs. The last quarter of 2012 and the first quarter of 2013, our growth in gross domestic product was only, in fact, it was not even 2%. It was below 2%. And for the last 15 quarters, our gross domestic product has increased only a little over 2%, the weakest growth since World War II in America. Now, for this year, 2013, we've created 750,000 new jobs, but 557,000 of those were part-time jobs. Now, why is that happening, and why are we losing full-time jobs? Well, under the President's Affordable Health Care Act, or as some people call it, Obamacare, any employer that has 50 or more employees and they work more than 30 hours a week, he's going to have to provide health coverage for them, and if they do not do so, they will be penalized with a monetary penalty. So the reality is what's happening is that small businessmen and women in America are laying off their employees and making sure that they only work part-time. So the President, focusing on green energy, encouraging small businessmen and women to lay off workers, that's precisely why we have a sluggish economy today. Now, the President says that he's for an all-of-the-above energy policy. And I would say to you that everyone on our side of the aisle supports an all-of-the-above energy policy. But after spending billions of dollars for renewables, the President has only been successful to a very limited degree. As a matter of fact, today renewables in America are creating only 500 million kilowatts a day. Coal is producing 4.5 billion a day. Gas, 3 billion a day. Nuclear, 2 billion a day. So the President has jeopardized and created obstacles to economic growth because of his sole commitment to renewable energy. Now, like I said, we need renewable energy. But this President says one thing and does another. He says he's for all of the above energy policy. And yet, because of his actions and his administration's regulations, America is the only country in the world where you cannot build a new coal-powered plant. And as a result of that, we're losing jobs in that industry as well. So I would just say to the President, his priorities are wrong. He is so focused on fulfilling his political goals of changing the way electricity is produced in America and creating obstacles for economic growth that he's self-defeating our abilities to stimulate the economy. And I would just emphasize once again, we do need all of the above energy policy. We need wind, we need solar, we need natural gas, nuclear, and coal. And yet we cannot build a new coal-powered plant in America. And if we're going to get this economy growing, we have to have electricity at a rate that we can afford in order to compete in the global marketplace, in order to get people to build plants in America, create jobs in America, and move this country forward. So I would just say to the President, instead of focusing on categorizing Republicans and who they are and what they are, he needs to get his priorities right and start focusing on economic growth and stop using stimulus funds to reward his friends in the joint venture capital business and his wealthy supporters, and start helping us build an energy policy that will work for America. And I want to thank the gentleman from Texas for giving me a few minutes to talk about that issue.
I thank my friend from Kentucky, and I just had seen an article that's really an exclamation point, really, of what the gentleman was saying. The headline is, 2 Americans added to food stamp rolls for every job the administration says it created. I mean, how tragic. What an exclamation point on those facts that were laid out by my friend, Mr. Whitfield. Thank you. There's news being reported today that Attorney General Eric Holder has announced the opening of a new front in the battle for voting rights, or at least so he says, his brand, which is rather ironic because this administration, and particularly the Attorney General, the Department of Justice, had talked about, in essence, how the Supreme Court had eviscerated the Voting Rights Act and just rendered it basically nothing by its terrible decision. And yet, if you look at the words of the Supreme Court in that decision, the Supreme Court points out that the factual data does not bear out the attacks by this administration continuing on the states who had done wrong, if you will, sinned back 50 years ago. There was racial discrimination in this country at the time of the Voting Rights Act. And there is racial discrimination today, but it has moved. The Voting Rights Act has accomplished a great deal in our efforts to move toward equalization or equality of opportunity around the country. And so it has accomplished something that is very good and very important to the country. But amazingly, when the Voting Rights Act was extended, and with support from people on both sides of the aisle, they decided that, gee, since some of us have districts where there's now racial discrimination, even though at least 6 of the states that were originally gone after in the South by the Department of Justice, they had better racial equality in voting than the average for the entire country. And yet, this administration decided our goal is to punish those states that did not vote for this president. We're going after these states. We're going to continue to punish them. We're going to continue to be punitive to them. We're going to ignore areas like Massachusetts, where there's now more racial disparity than in at least 6 of the states, maybe all of them in the South. But as I understood it, Massachusetts, unfortunately, has moved into the arena of being a state that has significant, most significant racial disparity. And yet, the Voting Rights Act did nothing to address those areas of the country where over the last 50 years discrimination has grown, it's raised its ugly head, and yet this administration said, no, we're too busy punishing states who corrected their problems and are doing so much better than the rest of the country. Why? Because we can. And actually, that is the reason the Voting Rights Act was extended without the Gohmert Amendment, that would have made sure that the Voting Rights Act applied across the country in any area where there was racial discrimination. But in a bipartisan manner, a majority forced the extension for 25 more years, which would mean, now I don't even recall who all was in office back when I was a little kid. I didn't know who was discriminating and who wasn't. I had no part in it. And people who had no part of the discrimination that was going on back then, the discrimination that needed to be addressed, the discrimination that needed to be corrected, for some reason have people in a majority of places that voted to extend it, keep punishing areas that are no longer committing wrongs, no longer sinning. We want to keep punishing them because if we open it up and apply these same punitive things across the country and come up with a new formula, gee, we're not going to be able to keep punishing these areas for their sins of 50, 60 years ago. We may have to punish our own states because racial disparity has grown there. So the Supreme Court did the proper thing, legally, fairly, and now we see this administration saying, oh, it turns out we can use the Voting Rights Act to continue to punish Texas. Why? Because we can, because we want to. And so they're coming after Texas, as announced today, again. And, you know, at some point, I hope we get to the place that the President spoke of when he spoke at the Democratic Convention, so eloquently talking about there's not a red America and a blue America. We're just Americans. I love that speech. I thought it was fantastic. It caused me to rise up and take notice. Wow, this guy's saying the things I believe in. He's so right. And yet his policies have been diametrically opposed. They have racially divided us, continuing to go after political enemies, continuing to have the administration, this administration's Internal Revenue Service, weaponized in a way that Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson could never have even dreamed they could have done. So hopefully the court to which the administration has gone in Texas will do the right thing. Say, no, you know, Mr. Attorney General, we remember your comments about how you don't have the power really to do this anymore since the Supreme Court struck Section 4 down. And so either we believe what you're saying now or we believe what you said out there after the Supreme Court decision. And that becomes a real problem when you have an Attorney General that says different things to different people. Because the highest law enforcement officer in the country needs to be trusted. He needs to have respect and adherence for and to the law. We have an Attorney General that's been held in contempt. He's been in contempt of Congress. He's been in contempt of the law. He's been in contempt of the actual facts repeatedly. We need a different Attorney General. I asked President Bush to appoint a new Attorney General when there was a scandal over national security letters. I thought it was an appropriate thing to do. When someone's credibility is hurt, even if they didn't even know it was going on, it's time to have new leadership and change what's going on. And we got a new Attorney General. Yet I'm amazed at how my friends across the aisle keep clinging, and as does the President, to an Attorney General who is in contempt of Congress, in contempt of the law, and in contempt of facts. An Attorney General who would have the nerve to testify that he's never even heard of anyone attempting to prosecute a reporter when he knew, as he said it, he had okayed and given his blessing to the persecution of James Rosen with Fox News. So he either lied to the to the Congress in his testimony, or he was a part of a fraud upon the court. Because the allegations in the affidavit, in the application for a warrant before the court going after James Rosen, claimed he had violated the law, set out the law he had violated, that he was a flight risk, that he was a risk to destroy evidence. So either he believed the things that he approved, or which means he lied to Congress, or he spoke truthfully to Congress and committed a fraud upon the court. Either way, we need the highest law enforcement officer in the land to have more credibility than that. And yet here he is doing the same thing, saying one thing, one place, claiming another in another place. It is so critical that we be able to trust our government. Which brings us back to the issue of NSA spying. Now, I was a freshman in 2005, 2006 in the 109th Congress. I was on the Judiciary Committee, and we had some very rancorous debate within our own party, behind closed doors, out in the committee room, here on the floor, over the Patriot Act, over the extension of power under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Courts. I was very concerned, even though we had a Republican administration and a president that I liked and respected, George W. Bush, smarter, wittier than people gave him credit for, a good, decent man. But we have to consider the possibilities, and we have to be specific in our laws. And when we debated these changes before the Judiciary Committee back in the 109th Congress, when I was a freshman, there were people, my Democratic friends across the other side of the aisle, that were very concerned about an abuse of power that might be occasioned if we don't tighten up the Patriot Act. And I'm just anal enough. I read the bill as it existed. I read the law as it existed. I was pushing for some things to be changed. And it did cause me some concern. The title of what basically is Section 215 of the Patriot Act, as it was at that time, before amended, access to records and other items under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. As amended, it would read, access to certain business records for foreign intelligence and international terrorism investigations. So I knew that was the titles, so that it really applied to foreign intelligence and international terrorism investigations. And my Democratic friends across the aisle that we would often consider way left had serious concerns. And I understood their concerns, but I thought they were being way too fearful of government because the law, we could make it specific enough that it would not be abused by a Republican or Democratic administration. And as I read through, having been a judge and a Chief Justice and had to consider from a legal standpoint, what do these words mean? What does this word mean? Can this be considered vague, ambiguous? Is this considered arbitrary and capricious? You look at word, is there room for misunderstanding? And I actually had some concerns, and behind closed doors, I was asking people from the Bush administration, Justice Department, I'm a little uncomfortable about this. What does this mean? One of the things I asked about was in the reference to the proposal for the amendment. It says, I just read it says, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation or a designee of the Director whose rank shall be no lower than Assistant Special Agent in Charge may make an application for an order requiring the production of any tangible things, including books, records, papers, documents, and other things, for an investigation to obtain foreign intelligence information not concerning a United States person. Well, I was comfortable with that language. That seemed to protect U.S. citizens pretty well. And then there was this disjunctive preposition, or disjunctive or. Okay, well, it can be that, or it can be this. The other aspect was to protect against international terrorism. Well, I felt like at the time I was okay. If we're really seriously to protect ourselves from international terrorism, again, that doesn't involve an American citizen unless you can establish with probable cause that an American citizen is involved in international terrorism. And then we get a second disjunctive or clandestine intelligence activities. And I raised the issue behind closed doors in our Republican meetings and when we met with justice officials. I'm uncomfortable with this because it doesn't say international in that part. You have the disjunctive or, but you left out international there. I'd really be more comfortable if it said to protect against international terrorism or clandestine international intelligence activities. And I was told, Congressman, you know, we know you're a judge and you get caught up in words sometimes, but look at the title of the article. The article says, access to certain business records for foreign intelligence and international terrorism investigations. So you shouldn't have to be concerned. This is only about international intelligence. It's only about foreign contacts. And we were assured repeatedly, behind closed doors and in debate, that this amendment to the Patriot Act would make it more difficult for an administration to abuse it. Republican or Democrat. And if you continue to read on, and so I was still a little uneasy, but yeah, and I know that when there is a disparity between language within a law and the title of the law, the language within the law itself takes priority over the title. I know that, but it was somewhat comforting. But if you read on down, this was as we were trying to amend it, and as the Justice Department under President Bush was pushing, it says, an investigation conducted under this section shall, and then it has a part, conducted under the guidelines, be not, and there's an and, so this is important, B, you can't go without B, and B, not be conducted of a United States person solely on the basis, upon the basis of activities protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And there were some current concerns during this debate over amending Section 215 of the Patriot Act back in the 109th Congress, that we don't want the administration gathering intel about someone if it is all having to do with their activity that is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So, for example, if someone were burning a United States flag or burning a Holy Bible, the Supreme Court tells us those are protected activities, protected by the First Amendment. And therefore, you could not use those to go gather intelligence data about an American who was doing those things. Now, of course, we have the UN and former Secretary Clinton and President Obama, others, saying, we like what the UN's saying. Basically, if we adopted what the UN said, it would still be true. Our Supreme Court would allow you to burn a Bible and a flag, but you could never, ever do anything like that to a Quran, which then would allow our radical Islamist friends who want an international caliphate to check the box that they created and was discovered during a raid some years back, that one of their 10-year goals was to subjugate the United States Constitution to Sharia law. And as soon as we adopt a law that says you can destroy a Bible and a flag but not a Quran, they can check that box. But under the proposed amendment in 2005 to the Patriot Act, or the official title under Title 50, War and National Defense, Chapter 36, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance, Chapter 4, Roman numeral 4, Section 1861. So, paragraph 3, after 2, that says an investigation conducted under this section shall not be conducted of a U.S. person solely on the basis of activities protected by the First Amendment, we get to paragraph 3. And this was an issue that was very contentious. There were groups boycotting and demonstrating and saying, hey, this is all about library books. We don't want the Bush administration being able to go in and get a list of books we've read. Well, I contended then, and still contend now, that to do such a thing of an American citizen, you should have to have probable cause that an American citizen has violated the law and get a warrant to do that. But this didn't require a warrant. This is allowed under the Patriot Act if it was for foreign intelligence purposes and for international terrorism investigations, according to the title. But unfortunately, in the law itself, it said, or to protect against international terrorism or clandestine intelligence activities. And I told people at the time, I'm a little uncomfortable with that because clandestine intelligence activities, what is that? What if it's just somebody going somewhere and asking questions, you know, not doing it in public, but going privately to individuals and saying, I'm really concerned about what the administration is doing on this or that. What do you know about what this administration is doing? What have they done to you? Would that be considered somebody doing clandestine or private intelligence activities? And I was told, you're being paranoid here, Gomer. Look at the title again. It's international terrorism. It's foreign intelligence. This is not about American citizens. No, look at the overall context. But those words hanging out there after a disjunctive or, it was a little uneasy, but I had enough people in the Justice Department on my committee with the administration at that time that said, no, gosh, no, you're looking for things where there aren't any. This is not an issue. But this paragraph 3, in the case of an application for an order requiring the production of library circulation records, library patron lists, book sales records, book customer lists, firearm sales records, tax return records, educational records, or medical records containing information that would identify a person. Wow, that's kind of scary when you consider that entire list of things that the Justice Department might be going after. But it says the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation may delegate the authority to make such application to either the Deputy Director of the FBI or the Executive Assistant Director of National Security. The Deputy Director or the Executive Assistant Director may not further delegate such authority. So they wanted to assure us that only people that were looking at foreign intelligence and foreign terrorism, who had the big picture, not some low-level rogue agent, would be pursuing anything like this. And we were told repeatedly, but it's all tied to foreign terrorism. And when you go down under paragraph B, subparagraph B, each application under this section, and 2 says, shall include a statement of fact showing that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the tangible things sought are relevant to an authorized investigation other than a threat assessment conducted in accordance with subsection A2 of this section to obtain foreign intelligence information not concerning a United States person, and then there's this disjunctive or to protect against international terrorism, another disjunctive or clandestine intelligence activities, such things being presumptively relevant to an authorized investigation if the applicant shows in the statement of facts that they pertain to, and then little 1I, a foreign power or agent of a foreign power. Now that gave me comfort. Okay, all right. If it pertains to a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power, okay, that's not an American citizen, and if it is, they're certainly an agent for a foreign power. Little 2I, subparagraph, the activities of a suspected agent of a foreign power who is the subject of an authorized investigation. Then another or before the 3 little I, an individual in contact with or known to a suspected agent of a foreign power who is the subject of such authorized investigation. And it talks about minimization procedures. But then under subparagraph little C2, it gives this order, this direction to a judge who may be asked to issue an order under this subsection, capital A, shall describe the tangible things that are ordered to be produced with, and get this, sufficient particularity to permit them to be fairly identified. Now, that gave me comfort. The judge, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court judge, who is a judge nominated by the United States President and confirmed by the United States Senate, thoroughly investigated by the FBI, they're the only people, when they're assigned to the FISA court, that could issue an order like this, and the law says that their order has to be with sufficient particularity. And we know from the law under the Constitution that if you want to go after specific private information about people, you have to have a warrant. And that warrant has to be based on probable cause. And the probable cause must be established by a sworn statement, and there must be sufficient specificity that we don't just have blanket orders to go get information. I know when I was an assistant DA up in Northeast Texas, we had a deputy come in one time, and it was the policy, if you want to get a warrant signed by the district judge, you need to come through the DA's office first so we can help you make sure you got probable cause, make sure there's proper specificity. And bless his heart, he was a great gentleman, older deputy, and he was always after this tiny little community in our county. He said, I know they're smoking dope out there. I just know it. I've sat out there and surveilled their house, and I haven't seen them with dope, but I know they've got it. So he came in one day and he said, I've got them. I get a warrant now. Well, what do you got, deputy? Well, you know, our little convenience store out there in our community was broken into, and one of the things they stole was potato chips. Okay. So what does that have to do with a warrant to go after marijuana? Well, the place I've been surveilling and watching, I found out absolutely for sure they're having a party Friday night, and they're going to have potato chips there. So all I need is a warrant to go look for potato chips, and while I'm there, I'll find the dope. I said, is there anything identifiable on the potato chip packages that would allow you to determine that these were the potato chips stolen from the convenience store? He said, well, no, but these are just potato chips. Well, Deputy, I'm sorry, but that's not sufficient specificity. I mean, I've known since law school. I've known since I was a DA and the years as a judge and a Chief Justice. You got to have specificity. The Constitution requires it. And so basically that's what this provision is requiring. You got to describe with sufficient particularity that people can identify the specific items that you're demanding to be produced. That's why when we all looked and saw in public information sources that a FISA court judge had granted an application for a warrant for every phone call made by anybody in America, whether outside the U.S. or inside the U.S., I couldn't believe they'd find a judge that would sign that. I mean, sure, you know, you might could find some judge in some jurisdiction that maybe didn't have, in that location and that court, you didn't have to go to law school, you didn't really understand the Constitution. But the justices of the peace, I know, would know you got to have some specificity here. You can't just come in and ask for everybody's phone record in the country. And so I have to say about my friends on the far left of the political spectrum that were suspicious back when we were pushing for, and being pushed really, for an extension of the Patriot Act. They had concerns that somebody might come in and get library records without adequate probable cause And it turns out their concern about library records didn't even come close to the danger that this act would pose for an administration that felt like they should have everybody's information. And I know I've talked to people on both sides of the aisle, and this may be one of the few rare issues where my sense is everybody truly wants the same thing. But when you look at what is being gathered, this was never, ever anticipated. And I can't remember if it was publicly or privately in our conversations when we were discussing this extension of the Patriot Act. And I was demanding sunset so we could still have some accountability and demand answers when we wanted them. But either privately or publicly, we were told, look, we don't even have the capability, 2005, we don't even have the capability to gather the data for every single phone call that's made by everybody in the United States. And even if we did, we would never do that. But anyway, that's one of those statements that was made. It was either private or public. And that assuaged some of our concerns. And the truth is, I just couldn't imagine a judge that had been nominated by any president, liberal, conservative. I couldn't imagine, confirmed by the Senate, obviously gone to law school, that would sign an order saying, yeah, go get every phone call made by every person everywhere. And I know the hearts of the people on both sides of the aisle that voted against and spoke against Justin Amash's amendment. And I know this is one of those issues where we really, I can feel it. I've talked to people on both sides of the aisle in depth and privately, and I know they want the same, we all want the same things here. We want to be safe, but we want to protect our liberty. And it seems that those who have dealt directly with the intelligence agencies and information, the classified information, they've said, you know, we really do need this because you don't know how much trouble we're really in if we don't have this. This stuff is critical. They need this information. Unfortunately, it brings us back to other problems. One, for example, when you have open borders and you know there are people coming in the country that want to harm us, hurt us, destroy our way of life, take away our liberties, then you need to perhaps give up some liberty in order to have security. I don't want to give up liberty. I don't think we should have to. But when you have open borders, as open as ours are right now, and people want to be secure and safe more than anything else, people are going to give up the very liberty that so many people gave their lives for us to have. John Adams had that amazing quote, and I don't have it verbatim, but in essence, you know, if people in future generations give up liberty, then I will regret from heaven that I sacrificed so much for them to get it, have it. We owe it to those who went before us not to so easily give up our liberties. In one of our hearings, where we were told, oh, it's only the metadata, it's only the numbers. We don't get who has what number and then look at what calls they've made. It's the metadata, so we can run the algorithms and look for patterns. When you have the numbers, and I ask the question, well, but our intelligence agencies are entitled, whether NSA, CIA, FBI, without a warrant, you're obviously entitled to go to the public sector and gather information that any American could get. That means if any American can get the phone number what someone's phone number is, then the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, Secret Service, anybody can get that, and then all you have to do is pull up those numbers and say, well, I wonder who this person called, and start looking. And for those, and I want to say this as respectfully as possible, for those who say we can justify this because it's probably saved us from some terrorist activities, don't forget John Adams and the thoughts of the founders and of those who gave their lives, their fortunes, everything they had for us to have liberty. And they said, don't give up your liberty. And I would humbly submit that back in those days of the Revolution, before the Revolution, that it would have been very easy for King George to have taken a step even beyond what he did, where he could quarter soldiers in people's homes without their permission. And it was one of the things that frustrated our founders, that the king, without anyone's permission, could send a soldier in to stay in your home, or more than one. And that's why they wanted to be assured that nobody, no government in America could ever do that kind of thing again. They could send a soldier just to live in your house and watch everything, take notes of what you're doing. They suspected, gee, we don't have any hard evidence, but we don't trust that guy. Let's send a soldier to stay in that home. They could do that. And the soldier certainly, hypothetically, could have taken notes of every activity. And then it would have been very easy for King George to say, look, I know you're concerned about me putting a soldier in every home that we are concerned about, even though there's no evidence you violated the law or no evidence you're a threat. But I want to point out to you that since, and this is hypothetical, but since we put a soldier in all of these homes to monitor everything going on in the home, we actually found a handful of terrorist plots by some of the revolutionaries, and we've been able to stop those. So we have actually saved American lives by having a soldier in every home of people we don't trust. And people could have said back at the time, wow, the king is really thinking about us and our safety because he saved people from being killed here in America, because by having soldiers in every home monitoring all this activity, they were actually able to find some people that were troublemakers that would have harmed Americans. So, yes, it's worth it. Okay, King George, you keep monitoring everything anybody's doing, even when you don't have probable cause. There's some similarity here. When the government can put that big Orwellian eye in your home and you call it your computer, your avenue, your network to the world, and they can watch everything you're doing in your home. They can watch every purchase you make. We find out now this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that was created under Speaker Pelosi, well, they want to protect Americans, from egregious credit card companies. So they're gathering people's financial information. And I go back to 2002 when a CIA attorney at one of our judicial conferences said, gee, banks have all your information, your financial information. Why shouldn't the government? And I was aghast and said, because the banks can't come to your home, bust down the door, throw you to the ground, put a boot on your back and put you in handcuffs and drag you off. But the government can and does. So we got to be very careful to make sure that the government does not overreach what they're allowed to do. So yes, banks, third parties may have financial information, but it does not mean the government's entitled to it. In fact, just the opposite, they're strictly forbidden to have that kind of information until Speaker Pelosi's House and Harry Reid's Senate passed a bill that said, oh yeah, we'll create this financial bureau and now we're finding out they're gathering financial information of people. And then we're assured, oh, you don't have to worry about Obamacare, even though we're hiring all these navigators, and we're not going to check their security, their background. We're not going to make sure that they're not a problem or have a criminal record, but we'll make sure, or try to, that they finished high school. And they may need to review your medical records to see what kind of insurance, government-mandated insurance policy you need. I mean, where does this stop? The government under Obamacare will have every American's medical records. The Financial Bureau can have everybody's, they think, everybody's financial information. That's the government having that. And then we find out that the NSA has gotten orders so they can get every single call that we have made to somebody. I mean, there is no specificity in an order like that. This has to stop. And I know that both sides of the aisle, this is that issue where we both have a kindred spirit. We want to protect people's liberty. But some that are so close to this issue have seen how much can be gleaned from people's complete phone records and say, look, this is really dangerous in America. I know how dangerous it is. I've been sounding the alarm for years now. And the Muslim Brotherhood has profound influence in this country and in this administration and in this government. And as we've already seen, the largest demonstration in the history of the world in Egypt, they figured it out. We don't want the radical Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, running our country. Well, I don't want them running ours either. But they're there. Secretary Napolitano couldn't even tell me how many Muslim Brotherhood members she had giving her advice. She didn't even know. Or at least she said she didn't. This is a dangerous situation. We are in danger. There are people who want to take our liberty and destroy our country, but that's no reason for us to voluntarily give up all our liberty, give up all our privacy in the hope that maybe we can stop others from taking it from us. When you give up the liberty, you've given it up. We're supposed to have the government protecting us from these kind of intrusions, not demanding all the most private aspects of our lives. You know, if somebody wants to disclose private information or private pictures about themselves, that's their business, but the government shouldn't be able to come in and get a picture of your most private information about your life and spread it around the government. And that is happening, and there is so much more potential for it to continue to happen and to get worse. The Patriot Act seemed like a good thing if we could have adequate oversight and make sure that the kind of things we've now found out are going on, make sure they weren't going on. Well, now we know they are. And I've been surprised. I've talked to some of my liberal friends across the aisle that express concerns about giving the authority to the government to get this kind of information. And I was surprised some of them voted no against Justin Amash's amendment. But that's the thing, when the NSA, CIA put pressure on Republicans, hey, you're conservative, we're with you. You got to help us have these tools. We're preventing people from being killed. You got to let us have all this private information about everybody. We promise we're not abusing it. And it persuades people on our side. And then on the other side, I talked to a friend that showed me a printout that he had been given. And it said, well, no, I think exactly like you do. I don't want them having that much information. But see, Louis, it says right here that it says, the law says that this can only be done, and it quoted, to protect against international terrorism and foreign intelligence information. And I said, that's right, that's what the law says, but that's not what they're doing. Really? I mean, it said this is all the... I said, they're right. That's what the law allows, but they're going so far beyond that. This is something we need to work on together. So if there was ever an issue where the left and the right could come together, look, we want to secure people's safety, security, but we can't keep giving up private liberty. Let those that want to tweet out their most intimate details, fine, go for it. Be a fool. But for those who just want to be Americans and live their private lives and be left alone, the government should not be watching everything they do through their computers, through their debit and credit card purchases and transactions, through every phone call they make. I thought I was being rather cute when I told my colleagues across the aisle who were very concerned that the government might get more than just information about contacts with foreign terrorists. Because that's what we were told. Look, the only way we gather information about who you're calling, who's calling you, is if you make a call to a known foreign terrorist, or you get a call from a known foreign terrorist, or you make a call to a member of a known terrorist organization, or you get a call from a known member of a known terrorist organization. Well, that comforted me. So I told my friends publicly, look, you know, if you're worried about having the government gather information on who you're calling, who's calling you, then when you call your foreign terrorist friends, use somebody else's phone. And it was amusing at the time. But now it turns out this government is gathering everybody's information and they're storing it and they'll have it and there's no indication they're ever going to get rid of it. When I was in college, I was required to read Kafka's book, The Trial. And I thought it was the silliest novel I'd ever read because it was one circumstantial, just crazy event after another, and a poor man never knew who was charging him, what he was charged with, and I thought this is just somebody creating a nightmare scenario, but thank God we live in America and this could never happen here. And yet I see the seeds of a Kafka novel unfolding before us. And I hope and pray, Mr. Speaker, that we will come together on both sides of the aisle and say, you know what? Let's secure our borders so only people that are legally coming in come in. Then once that's done, we can get an immigration bill done. And then because we're doing that, we don't have to keep giving up our liberty to have security. And then let's clean up this law so that some judge who's completely forgotten what the Constitution really means doesn't go off and sign an order to give the government every single phone call that's made to every single individual in and outside of the United States. Otherwise, John Adams will look from heaven and he will be regretting that he sacrificed so much for us to have the liberty that we're squandering. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.